Ladies and gentlemen, this is the first day of the Incheon International Ocean Forum, and this is the last session of the day. We will soon begin the Ocean Energy session, session 2. Please be seated. In this session, again, we have simultaneous interpretation. We have presenters joining online through Zoom. So if you need interpretation services, please tune in to channel 1 for Korean and channel 2 for English.
Interpretation into English and Korean throughout all sessions, and the receivers will be found at your table. Please tune to channel 1 as for Korean and channel 2 for English. 네, 마지막으로 휴대전화는 진동이나
Lastly, please make sure that your mobile phones are on silent mode and make sure you wear your masks throughout the forum. We will now begin session 2. Please be seated. Thank you very much. Okay, so I think we are all here. This is session 2, Ocean Energy. Session 2, Ocean Energy, is on the impact of the increase in renewable energy and development strategies. First, we will listen to an introduction of the session by Professor Hong Jong-ho from Seoul National University. Let's welcome Professor Hong with a big round of applause. Thank you. This is session 2 with Ocean Energy. I am Hong Jong-ho. According to our research, the economic benefits are about $24 trillion because ocean absorbs CO2 and emits oxygen. So it plays a very crucial role. Also, we had the first session the ocean is a route for logistics. And it also has energy resources as well. So the ocean ecosystem plays a very crucial role. But the thing is, human beings should preserve and protect the ocean, but we are not doing so. Due to climate change, the ocean is becoming full of oxygen, and the sea temperature is also increasing. And we are seeing extinctions in ocean resources as well. We also have issues of microplastic and ocean waste as well. So the ocean is really suffering. Therefore, international organizations are talking about the concept of the blue economy. So basically, blue economy is saying yes, human beings should find the drivers for economic development and find jobs as well. So we need to be thankful to the ocean and protect it and preserve it, and make efforts to protect and enhance the quality and value of the ocean. So throughout this second session, Ocean Energy, we want to talk about the increase in renewable energy in response to climate change. Renewable energy is especially becoming a notable solution to the crisis that we are facing. In April this year, according to a McKinsey report, by 2050, the global energy supply, about 80 to 90% of the electricity will be supplied through renewable energy. And in about 28 years, this is the world that McKinsey is looking forward to. Solar and offshore and onshore wind energy are the three major renewable energies that we are looking into, including wave energy and, of course, wind energy. So we have experts from the energy sector and how we're going to transport these energy. We have the experts to talk about this topic in depth. So I hope you listen carefully. And once the presentations are over, we have a panel discussion. So if you have any questions, please make sure that you ask your question. Now we will invite the presenters. Thank you very much, Professor Hong Jong-ho. Thank you for the introduction. So yes, I look forward to the session as well. We have the experts in these ocean energy industry. So the first presenter is with us online on Zoom. Remy Gruet. He is from OEE, Ocean Energy Europe. He will talk about the impact of the increase in renewable energy on the ocean industry. Let's meet him online.
Hello, good morning and good afternoon to you. I'm currently in the Caribbean, so I hope you will forget both my lack of tie and my slightly reddish face. Indeed, I want to talk to you about ocean energy and give a bit an overview of what the sector is like at the moment and where it's going. So next slide, please. Obviously, there is at the moment all over the world a great increase in the amount of renewable energy, variable renewables such as wind and solar, because they are the cheapest technology that are coming online. So this will be a bit the topic I will address and how ocean energy can help there. Ocean Energy Europe, for those of you who don't know us, we are a trade association. We are a trade body representing about 120 members, mostly European, but also US, Canada, Australia, and we even have some Korean members. So we are following a bit everything around the world. We have the largest network of ocean energy professionals currently existing. So here's some of our lead partners, as you can see on screen. Next, please. We have essentially companies manufacturing machines, companies organizing projects, so utilities, but also universities developing next generation technologies, and even regions who have identified ocean energy as a key technologies for job creation in their areas. Next slide, please. Thank you. So as I was saying, this is already a slide from 2018. And for those of you who knew Michael Liebreich, he was the head of Bloomberg New Energy Finance. And they've been putting out a lot of information on ocean energy and renewables in general, obviously. And he put up this slide already in 2018. And this is a slide which shows which technology is actually cheapest in which countries around the world. And you can see that blue standing for wind, yellow for solar. In most of the countries they have surveyed, gray are the countries they have not surveyed. Wind and solar are actually the cheapest technology outside of gas producing countries. Basically, it means everywhere. So next slide, please. And another thing that Bloomberg is still doing is to look at the cheapest deals around the world at the moment. As you can see, we've reached absolutely low, extremely low prices in both wind and solar across the world, and even offshore wind to a certain extent when the conditions are right. And that low price raise will continue. Obviously, at the moment, with the pressure on commodity prices, it's a bit on hold, I want to say. But essentially, it's very clear that towards 2050, next slide, please. towards 2050, we're going to have a grid relying on variable renewables, wind and solar around the world. Next, please. Thank you. That's also the modeling. It's not only in the real pricing, it's also in the modeling that you can see this. Bloomberg in 2020 put out their NEO, their new energy outlook, and they reached the conclusion that 69% of renewable energy globally was actually likely. And just a year before that, they were at 62, so it's increasing year on year, essentially. Next slide, please. And I'm very happy to have Dolph Dillon on the panel with me because Arena is one of the partners we work with, and their most recent roadmap also shows that 86% renewable electricity globally, which would mean above 60% of wind and solar, is actually the likely outcome. So really in this situation, we have a situation, and we will have increasingly towards 2050, a situation worldwide where cheap variable renewables are going to form the base of any electricity system around the world. Next, please. So where do we come in? Why is ocean energy interesting in such a scenario? Well, what you can see here in yellow is the peak production of electricity from solar, and in gray it's from wind. Now the black line is actually wave energy production. And this is a modeling that's been done by one of our members on one of the projects he's working on. And what you can see very clearly is that having an additional technology that produces at different times, but also a bit more regularly than both of the above, can help basically balance the grid. So it's ocean energy, both tidal and wave, and I'll get back to the technologies in a bit, but I really wanted to set the scene here with the future electricity system. But having an additional technology that can provide flexibility on the grid is going to be extremely valuable for any grid around the world. Obviously, you can do storage, you can do interconnections, you can do energy efficiency, you can do demand response, and most likely we will need all of those. But the advantage of wave and tidal specifically are that on top of flexibility to the grids, they also provide electricity. So it's not just a cost you add to your system like for storage. It's actually a new generating technology that provides additional value. Next, please. So yes, so complement to other renewables. It's essentially, if you look at tidal, so on the picture you can see one of the tidal devices produced in the UK. They just received a grant from the UK government to install 9 megawatts in the next few years. So the advantage of tidal is that it's very regular, it's 100% predictable, so it makes it very easy to plan when you're going to have production on the grid. Wave is a bit different. The main advantage of wave is the fact that it's off sync. It complements wind very, very well because the waves we use are generated by the wind. So when the wind starts, the wave devices will not start yet. The wind turbines will start, and a few hours later, the wave devices will start as well because the waves will have picked up the wind. And so the wind will have generated waves, if you like. And when the wind stops, obviously the wind turbines stop immediately, but the wave devices are going to continue producing for a number of hours. And probably by then, it's highly likely that the wind has picked up again. So essentially, by having complementarity between wind and wave on your grid, you help reduce the peaks and reduce the lows in electricity production, and you have less variations overall and less peak and lows. So you have less risk of, for example, negative prices, like we've had some occurrences in Europe. And next slide, please. So yeah, we are also researching how exactly is it impacting really the grid, and we have some researchers in University of Edinburgh who are doing a study on what does it do to add ocean energy to a system. And the first result they found is that by even adding small quantities, like they're looking anywhere between 1 and 30 gigawatts. So on a grid like the European grid, which is around 1,200 gigawatts at the moment, I believe, is still a fairly small quantity, but even adding such a small quantity is starting to reduce balancing costs. So you don't have to fire up your gas plant so often. You don't have to use hydroelectricity so often, so you can keep it for when you really need it. Basically, yeah, it's reducing this the balancing cost already. It's also reducing the need for further investments in your grid. Like obviously, if you have more flexibility provided by one technology, maybe you don't need to build so many interconnectors with other countries or other regions. Maybe you don't need to add so much storage. And this reduction of the cost of your investments in your infrastructure is obviously also a great benefit. And the final point, I have trouble seeing the slides here. It just, yeah, it simply reduces the price further. Obviously, via the merit order effect, you have a price effect on the spot market. The merit order effect, for those of you, it's a bit of a technical term from the, but it essentially means that high capex assets like wave, tidal, but also wind, will essentially reduce the cost of your electricity down the line. So these are really some of the benefits we're looking at for ocean energy. Next slide, please. Now the question you probably have is, well, I've never heard of ocean energy, or it's the first time I hear about it, or maybe I've heard about what's happening in Korea, but not around the world. So where are ocean energy technologies today? So essentially, tidal is at pilot farm stage. We have a number of demonstration farms in the water. Some of them have been in the water since 2015 or 2016, so quite a good feedback on how they've been operating. And we have a number of farms that are on the, basically that have just been financed at the moment. I was talking about the UK government. They just put 20 million per year pounds on the table to provide revenue support for 40 megawatts of tidal in the UK. France is looking at a 17 megawatt plant. Next slide, please. So there are a number of projects. Now, Wave at the moment is really at R&D and prototype stage. So most Wave devices, there are also two technologies like salinity gradient and OTEC that we are also following and that are encompassed in the appellation ocean energy. They are mostly at R&D stage at the moment, but most Wave devices are prototyping. You can see one of those, it's in the Canaries in Spain. Full scale, half scale, this is roughly where they are. Next, please. For Wave, some Wave devices are at pilot farm stage. So a few Wave, and this is where most of tidal is. And the one you see on the picture is a 5-device farm that is being installed in Portugal. The first device is going in the water, I believe, in September or maybe even in August. They've put the first cables and the first foundations down already. Next, please. Yeah, and this is the tidal plant I was talking about in France. So this is a device that has been in the water for 2 years. It's performed very well. And France is in the process of negotiating with the manufacturer for a 17 megawatt farm, which will be the first large-scale farm. It's going to be 5 machines again. 7 machines, sorry. And we're really looking forward to this coming online, because between the UK plants and the French plants, it would mean basically a game changer for tidal energy, and it would mean the start of exiting the valley of death of financing and getting into a situation where you actually can start rolling out your technology. Next, please. So what does the sector currently need most? It's basically market visibility for once and financial support for others. So we need to attract investors. You can't attract investors, the private sector, without having a business case, and you can't have a business case for technologies that are still at the moment a bit more expensive than wind and solar, obviously. You can't have a business case if you don't have support of some form. So at EU level at the moment, we have quite strong support. We have grant support on one side. We also have cheap loans. And these are things that have been used in Asia as well to develop wind and solar. But we also most crucially have revenue support. So a top up on your electricity price in the UK and France now This is crucial so that companies can make a return. And market visibility, next please, next slide. Market visibility is essential for developing as well. I'll come back to that in the slide afterwards. To give you an overview of what we think, like why we think ocean energy is really the next big thing in energy, is in Europe, we foresee about 100 gigawatts with current technologies, and it could be increased with improved technologies. 100 gigawatts of installation, which would be 10% of EU electricity and could represent about 500,000 jobs. Globally, at the moment, the best estimates we have are from the IEA with 337 gigawatts by 2050, again, with current technology. So the US, Canada are two of the countries that are really strongly investing as well. China, to a certain extent, has developed a number of prototypes as well. Korea has, as we see on the panel, a few companies as well who are looking into this. So it's basically an opportunity to repeat the commercial development and the industrial development, and having new industrial sectors that we've seen with wind and solar. Next, please. So in Europe, we have a large pipeline of farm, around 150 megawatts could be deployed by 2025, 2026, depends. But these farms need EU and national support. They're critical to generate data, to inform the designs, to reduce the cost. Without the pilot farms, you can't essentially reach commercialization. Next, please. So I'll finish with how it's being supported at EU level. It's one of the three sectors that have been identified by EU leadership and for EU leadership in clean energy. We have a strategy for offshore renewables to 2030. We have targets as well. We have a renewable energy directive, which is the laws in Europe that we use to promote some of the technologies. It's been essentially setting targets for 2020, for 2030, and at the moment that's the one that's being discussed. We also have obviously a lot of R&D investments and national climate and action plans. Next, please. The ambition of the strategy is to have 100 megawatts in the water, or at least at financial close by 2025, a gigawatt by 2030, and 40 gigawatts by 2050. So these targets give visibility to investors and to the private sector on how to deploy and how fast and how much of an interest there is from the public sector to support ocean energy. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's what I wanted to tell you a bit. Essentially, if I sum up, there is a great opportunity. It's a new resource. It's very helpful to have on the grid as a complement to wind and solar, so to the cheaper technologies at the moment. It's got great cost reduction potential because it's essentially the same business model, and it's got a great resource as well. So the only thing I can advise you is to look into it, and if you find some technologies that are interesting or some companies, then to invest in it, and I believe we'll have one on the panel a bit later. So thank you very much for having us, and if you have questions, I'll be there afterwards. Thank you.
네, 박수 부탁드립니다. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation. That was the very first presentation of session 2. Now the second presenter.
The second speaker is also waiting on Zoom, who is Mr. Dolph Gillen. He's the director of the IRENA Innovation and Technology Center. And the topic is innovation in the ocean energy industry.
Could you hear me?
Do you hear me? It's your turn, Director.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that introduction, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to participate in this International Ocean Forum. And I can build nicely on the presentation Remy just gave. We work with our 168 member countries on accelerating renewables deployment, and offshore wind, ocean energy, and also floating solar are an important part of that. We prepared last year for the G20 an overview. That's the basis of an action agenda for offshore renewables. And I'll present you today some of the insights from that, as well as from our latest annual cost roundup of renewable technologies and our world energy transitions outlook. So if you move to the next slide, I'll first go into more detail into offshore wind, then a few words about the ocean energy technologies, and then floating solar. So offshore wind is the most important component of these offshore renewables. There is a significant capacity already installed worldwide, 56 gigawatts out of total renewable power generation, total power generation capacity of around 8,000 gigawatts, especially Europe and China, and with huge additions in China last year. And floating offshore wind is an emerging technology where there's a lot of attention right now. We see a need for this decarbonization, that this technology needs to grow very significantly to 380 gigawatts by 2030 and even 2,000 gigawatts by 2050. So that is nearly a 40-fold increase compared to the capacity we have today. That requires significant investments in the order of 150 to 200 billion per year. The costs continue to fall rapidly. I can give you the last year's global average cost was 7.5 cents per kilowatt hour for offshore wind. That was what came on stream. And the average investment cost was $2,858 per kilowatt. So already significantly lower numbers than here in this table. Also floating is still a bit more expensive, but costs are also rapidly coming down, and there is very ambitious plans around the world, including, of course, also in Korea. Next one, please. So here's the global offshore wind forecast for the coming years. Took this data from BNEF, and you see, in fact, next year or this year doesn't look that good, slight decline. It's because of the China situation. We had this massive addition last year. But you see after that gradual increase to a level of around 40 to 50 gigawatts per year. And so if you do 50 gigawatts for a period of nearly 30 years, you are roughly at that level of 1,500, 2,000 gigawatts where we need to be. So this is in line with this 1.5 degree scenario that I talked about earlier. And you see here also the breakdown then of the different countries and their uptake of this technology, including also Korea. Next one, please. So Asia plays an absolutely critical role. We see Asia being more than half of the global market for offshore wind, based on a combination of resource endowment and electricity demand needs. So next one. So floating wind is, as I said, a relatively new technology. It enables the use of offshore wind also in deeper waters. There is not that much capacity installed right now, but 120 megawatts, but there's quite a lot under development. There was a very positive development with an auction in the UK, in Scotland, earlier this year, and there is important preparations elsewhere. So this is clearly a new part of the offshore wind portfolio that is growing, and that will increase the potential of this technology significantly. Next one, please. And here you see the important innovation efforts in offshore foundations, which is a big part of the total technology development for floating offshore and for offshore in general. And you see that Korea plays a key role here. It's the country with the most highest number of patents filed in terms of offshore foundations. So this indicates that going forward, it's likely that Korea will play an important role in this development. Next one, please. So moving to offshore, and Remy already talked about this. So there is not that much ocean energy capacity at the moment, and most of the capacity in place is tidal range. So the growth is probably in other technologies such as tidal stream and wave energy, but capacities are still at megawatt scale, so it's a different scale than for offshore wind. The potential is important. In our 1.5 degree pathway, we have it growing to 70 gigawatts by 2030 and even 350 gigawatts by 2050. So that means a significant ramp up is needed. And to make that happen, there is still work ongoing on the robustness of the technologies and on reducing the cost of these technologies. You see ambitious plans in different parts of the world. The technology that's making most progress at the moment, I would say, is tidal stream. We'll see a lot more deployment there in the coming years. Next one, please. And then floating PV is more of a niche. Of course, a lot of it is also on inland, on hydro reservoirs, etc., but also some applications in the ocean. This is also growing. I mean, you have to put it in a context of total global solar PV additions in the order of 140 to 180 gigawatts per year. So it's a small part of that, but it is in some countries a significant addition, and this is also continues to grow going forward, and also in a Korean context. So next one, please. So as I said, the cost of offshore wind continue to fall rapidly. We see still cost range across different countries. Part of it has to do with the quality of the resource, or what kind of capacity factor can you reach, what is the quality of the wind. Also, the water depth plays a role, but also, let's say, the scale of the industry in specific markets, so that there are important economies of scale also to be achieved. Next one, please. So, because we think that ocean renewables will play an important role going forward, and that view is shared by our member countries, we started also cooperation activities on this. One is the collaborative framework for ocean energy and offshore renewables, and Remy also participates in these discussions. So there, we have an exchange among governments on peer-to-peer collaboration and exchange of best practices in ocean energy and in offshore wind. And that is a very lively dialogue that also extends in various discussions about planning, about how do you integrate now, how do you evacuate that power? Do you do it as electricity or as hydrogen or hydrogen derivative, etc. So this is one important ongoing cooperation. And then I've moved to my last slide on offshore wind. We are currently establishing the Global Offshore Wind Alliance, where we collaborate also with GWEC, Global Wind Energy Council, and the government of Denmark and others to establish again a platform for dialogue among public and private sector. There is this general recognition that offshore wind needs to grow significantly. There's a need to facilitate that further by creating the right enabling framework, the right regulatory and market design aspects, and to make sure that this development indeed has also socioeconomic benefits so that you create local economic activity and local jobs. So that is starting now, and we hope it will help to accelerate the deployment of these technologies. So if you want more information, there is a lot of reports available from our website. If you can't find them, let me know and I'll point you to these sources. That concludes my remarks. Thank you very much.
네, 고맙습니다. 박수 부탁드리겠습니다.
Thank you very much, Director. Thank you so much for your insightful presentation.
다음 발표는 현장에서 준비하고 계신데요.
The next presentation is on site. We have Mr. Hong Ki-yong, researcher at the Research Institute of Ships and Ocean Engineering. Let's welcome him onto the stage. Let's give him a big hand. Good afternoon. I am Hong Ki-yong from the Korea Research Institute of Ships and Ocean Engineering. Today, I will be talking about the perspectives and promotion strategies of ocean energy development in Korea. I will first give you an introduction as well as the status of ocean energy technologies and the roadmap for ocean energy development. Also, I will touch on the issues and promotion strategies to overcome the issues. First, to take a look at the definition of ocean energy. When we define ocean energy, it covers all forms of ocean energy, including submarine, geothermal, and etc. And the seawater must be the motive power. But offshore wind or solar is not included in ocean energy. But if we look at the Korean National Plan for Ocean Energy, the combined generation of ocean energy, including wind and solar, is considered as ocean energy. So these are some common questions on ocean energy development. Is it ready for commercial application? Or is it possible in the future? And also, to implement ocean energy, what barriers are there and how can we overcome them? Another question is, because we have many different renewable energies available, is ocean energy competitive? So throughout my presentation, I hope I can give you some answers to the questions. First of all, the potential of ocean energy resources. When we look at the global ocean energy potential, as you can see here, it has a lot of potential. So wave energy is about the annual generation of wave energy can be 29,500 terawatt. And in Korea, 553 terawatt hour energy is produced in Korea. So the potential of global ocean energy is quite big. And it has a potential to generate about 21.9 gigawatts of energy. But if we look at the distribution in the map of Korea, the tidal power plant sites are more concentrated on the west coast, and the tidal current powers more on the southern part. The global status of ocean energy technologies are shown on this slide. It's from IRENA. And there are many devices. In case of tidal energy devices, we have TRLs. They are at an early stage of commercialization, and in case of wave energy devices is a bit later than tidal. The TRL8 is where we are at the current stage. So the national status of ocean energy technologies, the EU is seen as one of the leading ocean energy technology countries. And this is an evaluation of other countries compared to the EU. Korea is about 81%, and there is about a 4.5-year gap with the EU. Of course, this ocean energy technology refers to the average of all ocean energy technologies. And if we look at specific energy sources, we have domestically developed technologies as well. We have some key R&D projects. Let me brief you through a few. So in case of wave energy, they are mostly focused. It starts out from the coastal areas into the deep sea. And for better economic effects, we want to combine them with other technical aspects to better use the technologies, such as combining wind and wave energy. In case of tidal current energy, again, this is focused more on the economic effects, and the devices are available to generate about 1 megawatt of energy. This is for OTEC to enhance the efficiency, and in case of Korea, where the surface water, seawater, and the deep sea water temperatures do not differ much. So depending on these kind of environments or conditions, the technology is developing accordingly. In case of tidal energy, the Sihwa site is one of the biggest in Korea. And globally, there are many sites, but Korea has many. There are many potential sites for tidal range. We are also making efforts, and there is a lot of investment going on for R&D to create and manage test sites. And the test sites are currently in operation and can be run. This is the global vision for ocean energy development. One thing we need to think about is the competitiveness in terms of cost. So this is a report by IEA's OES. So in terms of LCOE, they have expected about $120 for wave, and for tidal about $130, and for OTEC $150. However, depending on the environmental conditions, the LCOE may differ, and therefore the technical issues are still unpredictable. Also, by 2050, IRENA is saying that about 40 gigawatts of energy can be produced. And according to IEA-OES, it's more positive. With a better perspective. In Korea, we have a national plan for ocean energy development. We have the 2030 plan for new and renewable energy to supply new and renewable energy to 20% of national electricity demand by 2030. And we also have a 2030 plan for ocean energy by the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries, with the development of a 1.5 gigawatt ocean energy infrastructure by 2030, with tidal energy of 254 megawatts, wave 220, hybrid 300, and tidal current 700 megawatts. So regarding the national plan, these are the national roadmap for each energy source. It is the process of development more in detail. So you can check this out in the presentation slides in the booklet. Another plan is the national strategy for CO2 zero. So scenario A is to reach a national target of zero by 2050, and it doesn't have a specific classification of which energy resource, so it has the aggregate total emissions. So this isn't a new concept or idea, but building on and an expansion from the 2030 plan. So by 2050, it is planning to generate 2.5 gigawatts through ocean energy. So, what challenges do we have ahead? And what do we need to think about for the future? First of all, for ocean energy to commercialize, we need to think about technical readiness, economic feasibility, and social acceptance. We need to tackle these issues in order to implement and realize ocean energy development. And because these elements are all interconnected, we will not be able to go forward by simply tackling a single issue. With greater demand in ocean energy, this will lead to more investment, which will lead to more installments, and that will lead to a cut in costs, and in that process, it will get more competitiveness. So, this is a virtuous cycle. It is all interconnected. And how are we going to draw out this virtual cycle? This is the question that we should answer. And to do so, we need to start somewhere. So, in the public sector should be able to trigger that starting point. We have the RPS system, the Renewable Energy Portfolio Standard System, for incentives in the market. And tidal power is currently not included in the REC calculation process. Although tidal energy is included, still the cost is too small, so it is not significant at this point. And the companies that are developing ocean energy, when they go forward, in fact, ocean energy related technologies are developed based on SMEs. So infrastructure and human resources are quite lacking. So to overcome this issue, in case of the United States, they have programs like this. National institutes and companies are linked together. So what the businesses lack are complemented through government institutions. So these kind of efforts are necessary. And in case of Europe, they have research infrastructure or technology development infrastructure where businesses can have access to these technologies at low cost. So this is something that the country as a nation should think about. Also, we need to think about how to promote the strategies. To do industry activities in the ocean, we need to know well. It's not easy to know well about how to proceed in the ocean. So in case of the EU, they have ocean energy policies to accelerate the development of ocean energy. They deal with issues such as whether to focus more on the developer, the process to be driven by the developer or driven by the public sector, or whether to make it accessible by the public. So these are including social acceptance. We need to think about the processes of using ocean to make it more business friendly. Another aspect is about economic feasibility. Korean technology in ocean energy compared to other countries are considered not as economic, or the economic value is quite low. So to approach, and I believe that it can be an opportunity for niche markets. In case of islands, they have a lot of ocean energy resources and have difficulty accessing electricity. So it can be a very good niche market. Also, connections with other businesses and creating new businesses. It can be a good opportunity to enter into the market. So to conclude, the commercialization and to promote ocean energy, to make efforts in these areas, first we need to innovate technology, we need to invest more, and in terms of policy, we need to consider incentives or think of ways and policies to promote ocean energy development. And by doing so, we will be able to suggest new directions for ocean energy. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for the presentation. It was very helpful. Thank you very much. Now it's the fourth presenter.
So the fourth speaker is waiting on Zoom online, who is Mr. Guzman Figar, the head of business development Asia Pacific Oceans Winds. Hello,
Hello.
are you ready?
Hello. Hello, good morning, everybody.
Thank
First,
you.
thank you very much for inviting me here to speak at the forum. I am Guzman Figar. I am the head of business development for Ocean Winds in Asia Pacific. I am now at the end of the month moving to Korea permanently to take a new position as country manager of the company in Korea. Okay, we'll explain a bit more about what we are doing in Korea in the next slides. Okay, can you go to the next slide? Thank you. So first, what is Ocean Winds? I don't know how familiar you are with Ocean Winds. Ocean Winds is a joint venture specifically and exclusively dedicated to the development of offshore wind energy. Okay, offshore wind is built by two companies, EDP Renewables, a Portuguese company, and ENGIE, a French company. Both EDP Renewables and ENGIE are very, very large utilities, one of the biggest utilities in Europe. And we have a very large pipeline of projects. We have approximately 10 gigawatt of projects in different stages of development. As you can see in the table here, we have three historic, we are present in several countries all around the world, okay, but we have three historic core markets, okay, UK, France, and the United States. And then, as you see in the bottom, Korea is starting to consolidate for us as the fourth biggest market. Okay, we have two large-scale developments in Korea, Korea Floating Wind in Ulsan and Hamandoi project in Incheon. If you go to the next slide, please. This is just a very small slide, just a few important facts why we believe Korea is so important for us and why we believe offshore wind is going to play a significant role in Korea. Okay, the first chart on the top left is the size. Korea is a very large electricity market. It's actually the number 8 electricity market in the world. It's bigger, actually. I come from Europe. It's bigger than any European market. So Korea has the scale, okay, to become a large scale market. Second, Korea has a complication, but that can be turned to an advantage, which is it has no natural resources. So unlike most countries in the world, most of its electricity comes from imports. Okay, that's 81% energy independence. That is not good, mainly for two reasons. The first is energy security. You are dependent on third parties for the supply of electricity and energy. And the second is a pure economical. Every time you consume electricity, it's money going out of the country. Renewable energy is the way to reduce the energy independence. Okay, the sun and the wind are local, and Korea has a very strong manufacturing base, so that the machinery and the equipment needed to build these renewable energy plants can be in a large scale built locally. Okay, the third is very important for companies doing activities in the offshore wind. Korea has one of the largest population densities in the world. What does this mean? This means that doing onshore renewable infrastructure is fairly complicated, and that's something we are seeing. Permitting an onshore wind farm is very difficult in Korea because the population is very dense, as I said, and also because of the landscape of Korea, very green, a lot of hills, very protected. Okay, so what happens in these countries? It happened in other very densely populated countries in Europe, like the United Kingdom, Germany, Netherlands, Belgium. When you are very densely populated, the infrastructure already exists to build the generation technology in the sea. So the countries that are very densely populated are the first that have a natural tendency of going to the sea to build part of the infrastructure. Okay, and all of this is translating into very specific renewable energy targets that Korea has set. Okay, there's 3 of them. It has a very aggressive solar PV target, a very aggressive onshore wind target, but for us, what's mostly important is a target of going from 100 megawatt of installed capacity today to 12 gigawatt in 2030. Okay, can we go to the next slide, please? And the next slide is very simple, but I like it because it is very visual. It's our 2 projects in Korea, Korea Floating Wind and Hanbando Offshore Wind. Okay, first, where they are located. The most important thing, or one of the most complicated thing about offshore wind energy is building the transport infrastructure, transporting the electricity to the consumption. That is why we believe the projects need to be very close to the load centers. Okay, that's why our first project, Korea Floating Wind, is located next to the Ulsan Busan area, and our second project, Hanbando, is located next to the Seoul Incheon area. This is terribly important as the grid will be a very limiting factor for the offshore wind energy. Okay, then some key factors. They are projects of very different characteristics. Korea Floating Wind is built on floating foundations. Okay, it is slightly more advanced than Hanbando. We reached our EBL earlier this year in Q1 2022. It has very strong winds, and it is part of the Green New Deal recognized by the Korean government. Okay, Hanbando Offshore Wind, it's a project we started a bit later. We started developing approximately a year and a half ago. We already installed the LiDARs in the sea. And I think if you know the process, we are preparing for our EBL application. We need to complete 12 months of wind measurements in order to apply for EBL. We will finalize the 12 months of wind measurements in January 2023. So we're hoping of obtaining the electricity business license around that area. Hanbando Offshore Wind has a size of approximately 1.2 gigawatt. Okay, and it has some advantages. Okay, the first, as I said before, is that it will be able to feed the electricity directly to the Seoul Incheon area, which is the country's largest load center. Okay, another advantage is that Korea has very deep waters, so there are not many places suitable for bottom fixed foundations, which is the most advanced technology for offshore wind development, but the waters of Incheon are suitable. Okay. And last, Korea Floating Wind, we are targeting to start construction in 2025. In Hanbando Offshore Wind, we are targeting to start construction 2026 or 2027. Okay, can we go to the next slide? And then I wanted to speak mainly about how does an offshore wind project affect ports. Okay, so the link between offshore wind energy and ports. Okay, so in this slide at the bottom, you can see more or less the cycle. Okay, the cycle in the lifetime of a renewable energy project. So we have identified 5 different phases: early development, manufacturing, installation, or construction and operation. Okay, during the early development and the development, there's some activity in the ports because we are doing the LiDAR campaign, we are doing field studies, geotechnical, geophysical studies, but most of the activity is around the manufacturing and installation phase, okay, and also in the operation. During the Okay, so here we can see during the manufacturing, most of the activity is the fabrication yards. During the installation, it's the marshalling or installation port, and during the operation, it's the O&M base. Okay, last thing to remark, if you add the timeline at below, the typical lifetime of an offshore project is 40 years. Okay, so they are very, very long projects. Next slide, please. Then I just wanted, as I started before, we recently put in operation a project called Moray East in the United Kingdom. It's a project of a similar technology to what we are trying to, or to what we are developing in Incheon, and of a similar size. So the best way for me to show to you what is the impact of one of our projects in the port activity was to show you real pictures of our project in the UK that was just put in operation, okay? The first relates to fabrication, okay? Many components will be built locally. I think all of the developers that are developing projects in Korea have a clear ambition to manufacture as much as possible locally. And then what can be specifically manufactured locally is, of course, the foundations, okay? The towers, cables. Korea has very strong cable companies, electrical infrastructure, and nacelle assembly. Okay, so of the entire wind farm, we need to fine-tune the models to identify what is the local content, but there will be a significant local content, being Korea as it is a very industrial powerhouse. Okay, next slide. Next slide is a view of our installation port in the United Kingdom, where we did the installation. There you can see the different components of the wind farm being installed. Okay, here you have top left. If I go top left, you have the blades. Below, you have the tower sections. Below, you have, again, the blades. Top right, you have the nacelles. And below, you have more tower sections. So basically, all the infrastructure is being stored in port and being loaded on different transportation vessels, where they are transported to the sites. And the installation for offshore for bottom fixed wind farms typically takes place at the site. Okay, I'll show it. I'll show a picture later. Okay, and the third part where we play an important role, if you go to the next slide, is the O&M. Can you go to the next slide, please? The O&M, of course, it's less intense in number of people than the manufacturing on installation, okay, but it lasts 25 to 30 years, okay? So it has a very large duration, okay? What we typically do during the O&M phase is that we build the O&M center in the port, okay, where we have our office, our technicians are there, but we also try to have all the technical teams of all our subcontractors in the same office. So we have an office of typically 30, 40 people in the port, okay? The next we have a crew transfer vessel. Our project in Incheon will be located approximately 80 kilometers into the sea, which means we cannot go out from the port every day to operate our turbines or to operate our wind farm. What does that mean? We have a crew transfer vessel on port, and to the right, it's a OSV, which is an offshore service vessel at the site. So we take the technical teams to the offshore service vessel, where they typically stay for approximately a week. Okay, they live there. They live at the site, and then they access the wind turbines directly from the offshore service vessel, where they do the operation. Okay, and after a week, typically the crews change. Okay, so a new crew comes in, they take over for a week, and that's how the operation is done. That's how the operation is done in projects that are located far away from the port. Okay, and the last slide is there is a lot of vessel activity. Okay, there's a lot of vessels going in and out of the port, transporting all the material and all the equipment and supporting the construction. On the top right, you have a jackup. Okay, that's how the projects are typically built. So the vessel goes to the site, and it has legs, so it stands up. Okay, and it has cranes, and you do the construction directly at the site. Okay, but there's also many other vessels take place during the installation of our projects, transporting the blades, transporting people, installing the cables, etc., etc. Okay, so this was my presentation. I didn't want to extend too long. I was told to speak only for 13 minutes, but I would like again to thank Incheon for the invitation to speak here in the forum, and all the attendees for your attention. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. 박수 부탁드립니다. 네.
That was the presentation of the Director Guzman Figar. And we are at the session 2, Marine Energy, and we're talking about the future direction of the marine energy development. So we were supposed to invite 6 presenters.
The next presenter is Mr. Yu Byung-yong from Korea Shipbuilding and Offshore Engineering. Hello? Could you check your mic or volume? We can't hear you. Hello, can you hear me? Hello, I am Yu Byung-yong, Vice President of KSOE. Ocean is the expressway for logistics on the ocean. And today, I would like to talk about the new energy marine transport in a world of hydrogen. Before I begin, I'll briefly introduce our company. So, we have 3 industries of shipbuilding and marine, energy, and industrial machines. So you have here, we have KSOE, our company, and Hyundai Heavy Industries. So Hyundai Heavy Industries is the global top 1 in terms of the amount of order backlog and product group in the world. Especially, we are number 1 for LNG carriers and LPG carriers. And these carriers or ships are the ones that transfer our energy sources through or by sea. So currently, the most clean and high value added resource currently is LNG, where natural gas is liquefied and transported through ships. So this is why these carriers require the highest level of technology. And we have secured that technology. LPG is also one of our LPG carriers are also one of our flagship carriers. As you may all know, with LNG and LPG, they are one of the cleanest energy resources, but the world is changing very quickly. With COVID-19, the global economic order and energy transformation has accelerated. And also, COVID-19 is somehow a warm-up for what is coming in the future. And we also have Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So energy security has become more important, resulting in a sharp rise in global energy prices. If we look in the long term, we're going from fossil fuel centered to energy neutral. And what is more, the core of this is new renewable energy. However, renewable energy negative point is that the energy is produced or generated not at all times but intermittently. So at this point, hydrogen is considered as the most promising energy resource among renewable energies. And we believe that in a carbon neutral society, energy transport, storage, and conversion will be enabled through hydrogen. And from 2020, green hydrogen production costs will become cheaper than gray production costs. And in a carbon neutral society, hydrogen economy is expected to grow. But despite the cheaper costs, the production output and cost will differ by region, resulting in a demand for marine transport of the produced hydrogen. For example, in case of Chile or the Middle East or Australia, these countries that have and develop hydrogen at cheaper costs are expected to ship these hydrogen energy sources to countries like Korea. Of course, just because we have LNG, it doesn't mean that fossil fuel will disappear. You can see here that the world seaborne trade in ton miles per vessel type, and the gray part indicates LNG and LPG carriers. Although small, it still exists and it continues to grow. The current clean energy sources, like LNG and LPG, are very meaningful and will be very useful in going forward into a world of carbon neutral. And on top of this, hydrogen transportation will be added. So, marine transport of hydrogen. So, to transport as much energy as possible on ships, hydrogen is stored and transported in liquid state like LNG. When liquefied, hydrogen 600 folds more of hydrogen can be transported. So when liquefied, it becomes ammonia or becomes LH2. So these new types of carriers will be required in the future. Or, to look from a different point of view, we transport the LNG or CO2. We would reform the energy source of liquefying the energy source. The first is green ammonia carriers. The liquefaction point for ammonia is quite similar to LPG. In fact, ammonia can be transported by using LPG carriers because they're technically the same. So no issue in terms of technical aspects. So Korea is actually going forward to transition the coal power plants into dual fuel plants where 20% of the fuel will be ammonia. But later on, we are expecting a 100% green ammonia carrier in the future. In case of LH2 carriers, this is still in development. So for LNG carriers, we are developing LNG carriers, but in case of H2, it's actually the liquefaction point is much, much lower. So this may not seem that much of a big difference, but actually it is a big difference. So it requires some new technologies. So the LNG plants can mix hydrogen with gas at the LNG hydrogen dual plants. And we are expecting a rise in this demand, leading to a greater need for building a reliable hydrogen supply chain. And so the limitations that we are facing in transporting hydrogen will be carried by LNG carriers for now. And we are currently developing related technologies, and we are developing the technology in line with the national plans because we need a demand in order to use this technology. We are a leading company for hydrogen engine. We have our own brand and in-house developed technology. We are currently developing the LNG hydrogen dual fuel energy engine for the Hyundai LH2 carrier. And we are planning to complete the substantive test planned for 2022. When we talk about CCS when talking about achieving carbon neutral a carbon neutral world. And that is why we need CO2 carriers to inject the CO2 into the ocean. So we have a vision of 2030 hydrogen value chain. And today I am focusing more on green ammonia carriers with ammonia propulsion and our LH2 carriers and liquefied LH2 carriers. So I focused more on the clean oceans and clean energies. We will make further efforts to realize this dream. Thank you.
네, 세븐님 발표 잘
Thank you very much
들었습니다.
for your
네,
presentation.
세션즈 어느덧 마지막
We
발표자를
now have our
소개해드리겠습니다.
final
발표자는
presenter.
바로
He is with us on
마지막
site.
설명을 보내주셔서 인진의 성용준 대표 이사님께서 준비를 해주셨습니다.
We have Mr. Song Young-jun from the Injin. Please give him a round of applause. Good afternoon. Thank you for the introduction. I'm Song Young-jun from the CEO of Injin. And my presentation is not about providing macroeconomic perspective or the global trend, but I'd like to share with you what our company has been doing in terms of commercializing the tidal wave power generation. And I've been in this field for the last 10 years. And my impression is that in order for the wave power generation in Korea, there are some areas for improvement, and that is mainly the focus of my presentation. Injin Incorporation was built in 2012, and we've been focusing on tidal wave, and we're a small company hiring about only 30 people. And tidal wave wasn't a initial focus of our company. We were interested in off-grid energy, and many people are using diesel powered electricity because they don't have any other substitutes. So across the world, 400 million people are dependent on the electricity powered by diesel, and this electricity, the making of this electricity emits about 400 million CO2, and it's up to five times more expensive than the on-grid electricity. So it is with a huge CO2 emission and it's more expensive. So we wanted to transform this method into greener and more affordable energy sources. So for tidal wave, so why wave? I think Dr. Hong made a great presentation about this. So I'm not going to go into detail, but the tidal wave emits the CO2 by 1/6 of that of the solar power. So it has a very low carbon emission. And compared to diesel generation, it's 1/100th. So it has a huge potential in terms of reducing the CO2 emission. And if any place has tidal waves, then it has a huge potential for making electricity out of those waves. So there are many ways to categorize the tidal wave generation. And one is offshore type. So you build a farm offshore and you transmit this electricity made there to onshore. And most of the power wave generation is run on the offshore type because it has benefits of being able to use waves and it has lower it has less limitation in terms of installing the facilities. So our focus was to replace the diesel generation, and offshore type wasn't really appropriate for our target because the cable to through which the electricity is transmitted is really expensive. And most of the projects that we were aiming were not able to realize this scale of economy of scale. So that's why we shifted our attention to onshore type because it's more appropriate for off-grid. And this is conceptual approach. So the control and other devices are controlled controlled onshore, and the motion of the waves and other elements to be checked are controlled or monitored on offshore. So you can say how the waves give pressure to the cable by tens of tons. And this is the test site in Jeju. And how you can see the buoys move and the pressure is transmitted through the ropes. And that pressure is the source of power to make the motors move. And this tidal wave can be translated into electricity. So transmitting this signal after being made appropriate for the power generation is also included in our process. So there are three characteristics. There are no transmitting cables, so you can decrease the capex because you run on a small size basis, and it's easy to maintain the facilities, leading to some advantages in OPEX. And it's also appropriate for small and mid-size areas. And it's also appropriate for off-grid energy. So I just shared with you the process, the some practical process, and now into the R&D stages. So you have to start with the small scale test, which is the water tank test. This is where you can have a lot of tests and experiments under different environments, different engineered environments. and it requires a lot of trials and errors, a lot of costs. So we spent 10 years, which was a long time for us. But if you look at the overseas cases, with 10 years is just an average because it requires a lot of efforts, both time and money. So what brought us here is our success in attracting the investment from KDB, SK Innovation, Hana Financial Group. We were able to secure financing from private players, and that's what brought us here, thankfully. And currently, we are preparing the full-scale commercialization test. And we're thinking of selecting one Korean or overseas site. Honestly, we were looking at overseas sites, but because of the COVID situation, we turned our heads to local areas in Korea. So I think this project will be implemented soon, either in Korea and overseas sites. And we have concluded a design project with Canadian federal government for Vancouver. And the patents that we submitted is 132, and the patents that we registered is 61. And this is a blue ocean, so it's not a red ocean, so it's basically a first come, first served basis. And this is an article from the Forbes, and it quotes one US patent. And there were 26 quotes. We were cited 26 times for this area, for this field, by other technologies. This is really promising. And as was mentioned by Dr. Hong, this slide is pretty much echoes what he said, and I was delighted to see that. And the thing is that we don't have many players yet, and the industry is not yet mature. So basically, you have to be a pioneer in everything. And that's why we need full support from the government. And I know the government is doing its best, being aware that we are in need of some help. So marine ocean industries, including the tidal wave industry, have been led by the government. And I think it's natural because it's a new area and there are no precedents. And that's why the government has to take the lead. And the technologies are mostly owned by the state-funded research institutes. And what I feel through the communication exchanges with other players in other countries is that Korean technology itself is almost at the top tier level. And of course, this technology is owned by the government, as I said. So what's important for this technology is that it should be transferred and shared among private organizations. That's where we need the support from the government. Because we've gone through a lot of trials and errors so far. And if we had been able to get some help in terms of know-hows and direction setting, we would have gotten here a lot faster than we did. So that's the biggest regret that we have for this industry. And another thing is that for any energy industry to develop further, it has to include, involve, or engage with the private sectors. And we're a small venture company, but what we need to see more is the funding and financing capability of large companies. And market environment should be appropriate for inviting those large companies. And I myself used to work at SK Group and the RAC for the tidal wave and for so the RAC is not really set properly for the tidal wave yet. And I think that mandate that requires more active engagement from the large companies. And because we don't have FIT and REC yet, and that's why we need the support from the government too. So I'm not sure whether 1,000 Korean won is per kilowatt is appropriate or not, but I think if I do some calculation, it's going to require 500 billion won for the next 20 years. If you do the calculation based on 1,000 Korean won per kilowatt hour. So I think what I'm saying is that you need to involve and engage with as many private sector players as possible. And the more we see more ambitious private companies in this industry, more likely we are to see the development and advancement of our industry. And lastly, it's not easy to utilize the tidal wave. As is mentioned by Dr. Hong, some foreign countries have regulation support. They have this framework that can build the conducive environment, but we don't have that regulation and system framework. And I told you that the technology level of Korea is one of the top tier in the world. So in order to utilize that technology to the maximum, I think we need to see more conducive environment. So we're talking about 100 gigawatts by 2030, by 2050. I think we need to see more infrastructure support, and system support from the government. Thank you. That was the last presentation of the session 2, marine energy, and it was the topic of further direction of the marine energy, and we'll open the Q&A session by inviting the moderator and the discussants for deeper discussions. And as was mentioned by Mr. Song, Korean technology is at the top level, global top level. So it has a huge potential for further development in the future. And I think that we can use the discussion session for more in-depth dialogues in this. And we'll just delve into the very last section of today's session of the third IIOF. And we have 2 speakers on site, and we will be joined by 4 online speakers for the Q&A session. So we have 1 moderator and 2 speakers who are joining us on site. So over to you.
We have to wrap up by 5:30, So we don't have much time, but we will try to focus on the discussions on the topic. So renewable energy, and today we're especially talking about ocean energy. The reason why renewable energy and ocean energy is important is because of climate change. We need to respond to climate change. Without that issue, actually, fossil fuels are much better in terms of money. So we may not go in this course of looking into renewable energy. We are already feeling the impact, and the impact is growing over time. So renewable energy is considered as a solution for responding to climate change. In fact, among the OECD member countries, South Korea has the lowest amount of renewable energy electricity being produced. It's less than 8% of the total energy produced. So, through your presentations today, we talked about offshore wind energy and also tidal energy and wave energy. So these were some alternatives in ocean energy. And also green hydrogen was also a topic to deliver the hydrogen to other countries. And importantly and interestingly, the presenters today are from non-governmental agencies, international organizations, and from many different bodies. You are playing your role in your positions. So, like countries like Korea that need renewable energies but are not quite there yet. So in order to expand renewable energy in Korea, what opportunities and challenges do you have, and do you think we have? You may not know well about the Korean situation, so in that case, you can share some of the successful cases overseas. The challenges that you have faced in the process of developing renewable energy. And if you know well about the Korean situation, it would be nice if you could make some suggestions in how we can expand the renewable energy development, especially in ocean energy, especially in terms of politics or policy making, and how we can overcome these challenges. So how can we break through this difficulty? So please feel free to answer and give some opinions. I'll give you each about 3 minutes to speak. The first presenter, first to Mr. Remy Gruet, please.
Yes, thank you, dear moderator. First, I want to clarify one thing. The beginning of my presentation was aimed at making people understand that wind and solar are currently cheaper than fossil fuels on most markets in the world. And this is already true 4 years ago, and it is especially truer, it's even truer today. So in most markets, these technologies have a lower cost than gas or coal. And that's really important to understand. Now, if in Korea, and I don't know the situation well enough to comment on that, if that is not the case in Korea, it's highly likely that this is because of administrative barriers to the development of those technologies. So in that case, my main policy recommendation to increase the percentage of renewables would be to look into the policies and the permitting, the consenting frameworks, the rules that new projects in renewables, whether it's tidal, wave, wind, or solar, doesn't really matter, but look at the rules that they have to follow and work on them, amend them so that it becomes faster, which also is going to be cheaper to build projects. To give you an example, at the moment in France, it can take up to 8 years to build a wind farm. In the UK, generally it's 2 years. So that's a significant benefit. Obviously, it means that your cash is stuck if you're building a project for less amount of time, etc. Now, looking specifically at wave and tidal, which are more innovative technologies in the renewable field, if you want to develop innovative renewables, well, especially for port areas, obviously there is a huge benefit because both offshore wind and tidal and wave essentially get built close to the areas, and a number of port authorities in Europe have hugely benefited and have reoriented themselves entirely away from gas, for example, towards renewables, even though some LNG is also, obviously, developments are also being made. But some port areas and some facilities are being built on port areas, and some port areas are being designed specifically for those. So to go back to the policy aspect, if you want to promote innovative renewables, you will need two things. You will need grant access, which by the government. So essentially, it's a subsidy that you need to give technologies because they are slightly more expensive at the moment. And then you will need revenue support. So it could be a feed-in tariff. Essentially, it's a top-up on the price of electricity that you will sell to the market as a renewable project owner. And by doing these two things, you essentially have a business case for private investors. The last piece of the puzzle, as I was mentioning earlier, are targets. If the government sets targets, then it gives a visibility for investors that this is something that the government wants to invest in. So again, from that perspective, supporting innovative renewables is fairly easy. You help on the investment side, you help on the operation side, and then you have a technology that can benefit your region, that can benefit your port authority, that can benefit your infrastructure, that can make use of vessels locally, that can make use of the supply chain facilities that you have, and essentially can provide a new industrial sector to make use of the industrial capacity you already have. So I'll stop there.
네, 감사합니다. 잘 들으셨죠?
Thank you very much. In fact, renewable energy, many Koreans think that it's too expensive. That's what most Koreans think. But in fact, as Remy Guet mentioned, especially in Europe, it is much cheaper. It is already there. So the Korean government should make efforts in terms of policy. Thank you for the answer. Next.
Mr. Dolph Gillen.
Comment a bit on the moderator just said. I mean, it's not only cheaper in Europe. If you look at the developments in China next door, you'll see it's also cheaper there. So also in Asia and also in Korea, there are important opportunities. And I agree with everything that Remy just said. So we see that for offshore wind, the permitting is an issue. The grid connections is an issue. And the sea looks empty, but it's not empty. There are competing uses. There is shipping lanes, there is fisheries, there is military use, there is, of course, environmental concerns. So you need to find solutions that serve all these different, that address all these different concerns. It helps if the government steps in and does already a lot of the planning and preparatory work before projects are tendered. That takes away a lot of the risk, and that makes it that project development costs are lower, but it also means that you get a lower cost of capital for your projects going forward. I mean, I showed you some numbers for China, where you had this huge peak of offshore wind installations last year. So that's on one hand, that's nice, but on the other hand, that's not so good if you have these stop and go policies where you have an enormous development of an industry and next couple of years there is no business. So try to have policies in place that give a little bit more continuity longer term. That will also be very beneficial. And so we also saw that parts of the offshore wind is in a different stage than the ocean technology. So you need also to adapt your policies to the specific needs of where these specific technologies are at the moment, with more of the innovation policies on the ocean side, still more of the deployment policies for the offshore wind. Thank you.
네,
Thank you very much for your answer. So yeah, it's impressive that it's not. It's just it's cheaper in Europe, but it's also cheaper in China and anywhere in Asia. And you also mentioned how we have to take into consideration many concerns and many players and stakeholders and interests, and we have to think about that too. Thank you.
Next, Dr. Hong Gi-young. First of all, in terms of technical development challenges, I want to talk about that. So for developing ocean energy, we need actual R&D projects to be conducted. And that actually costs a lot of money. So in the process of our research and development, and most of these are conducted as a national research and development project. And we construct the plants, and once it's constructed, it's kind of that's the end of the project. But to go forward, we have to take time to go through substantiation. And to go forward from R&D to actual commercialization, this substantialization, we don't have this substantiation stage at the R&D level. So even though we have the technology, we're not able to prove this through substantiation. So this is why I think it is an important part to be supported in the R&D process. And in terms of social acceptance, I mentioned it very briefly in my presentation, but in Korea, the developer actually is at a stance where the developer has to solve all the problems regarding social acceptance. And ocean energy is one of the national plans that we have. And in order to utilize the ocean energy and to going through that development process, putting everything on the shoulder of the developer, I think, is very challenging and it's not that appropriate. So, in the process, it is something that we need intervention from the public sector where the policies are made. I think that's the solution that we need to go forward to. And also, regarding renewable energy, we have a lot of national plans and policies, but it changes too often and it is not sustainable. So, when we look at the process of making progress, for example, we have energy self reliance. We did have a lot of discussion, but we didn't have any fruitful results and the policy ended. So it's not sustainable and the policies change too often. So We need sustainability for technical development, and it really takes time to make improvements. So that's one of the challenges that I think we should overcome. Thank you. That is true. I think it's not just for ocean energy, but for all renewable energy. So we shouldn't leave everything on the developer or the private sector's shoulders. It's too much responsibility. So it's something that the public sector should take on and take responsibility of. Next, Guzman Figar.
So my question was regarding the Korean situation. So even though you missed the question, I know you are most familiar with the Korean situation because you are conducting the project yourselves, right? And now you are more aware of the Korean situation, listening to the presentation. So what will be your position for the Korean situation? And do you have any opinion for the government approach or government support for the project?
When you say the Korean situation, sorry, are you talking about the changing government?
I mean, not change the government, but if you have any suggestions toward Korean government, because you're trying to implement offshore wind projects in Korea?
Yeah, okay. I think the policy the Korean government is implementing, we believe it is the right one. And we have been looking at many countries into the world, as you know. I personally have been starting to do business development for my company in many geographies, and after looking at many geographies, we believe the country with the more suitable framework, okay, and with a real need for offshore wind is South Korea, and that is why we are starting to develop projects here, and why South Korea is going to become our main country in Asia. Okay, of course, there are things that can be improved. The government has given us a very clear mandate, I think, in two main directions, or three main directions. First is reduce the cost of energy. Second is maximize local content. And third is ensure stakeholder acceptance. We are working very hard to try to deliver what the government wants from us, but sometimes we feel the regulations prevent us from doing this. Some specific examples. In our project in Ulsan, we believe or we know we will be able to reduce significantly the cost of electricity if we do some overplanting, which means we install more turbines in order to account for the electrical losses during the transmission to the onshore substation. The regulation right now does not enable us to do that. So we have a situation where the regulation prevents us from doing things that would benefit the project through lower cost of electricity. In terms of stakeholder acceptance, we are working with the fishermen, we are working with the local communities, we are working with many peoples, and as was explained before, we sometimes would believe we would benefit from more support from the government, from the regional and the central governments. So I do believe the policy is the right one. I do believe we are extremely aligned with the goals of the government, but then we believe, or what we expect is the government to be closer to us to help us in delivering what they want or what they need from us.
예, 고맙습니다. 결국 정부의
Thank you very much. So the regulation should be reasonable, right? It should be a necessary one and reasonable one. That is the most important issue. Next.
Next, Vice President Yoo Byung-yong, you talked about the hydrogen industry, about how alternative it can be in the industry. It's a very hot topic in Korea. So, what's your opinion? Can you hear me? Well, when we talk about energy, for renewable energy to develop and advance, money is the problem. So economic aspects need to be considered. So we're not looking at the demand today, but the demand of the future. So we shouldn't just look into the economic side, but the policy and government support. That's something that we need to look into. But in reality, many of the panels mentioned, but as Dr. Hong mentioned earlier, the Korean government projects are going more focusing on R&D, and they're looking into how to provide the services and to actually find value rather than looking into the economic side and substantiation. For example, at this point, it doesn't create money, so it's not economic. But in order to commercialize and make it into a business, it's kind of awkward to put it into an R&D category or even to make it into a business. So it's kind of very ambiguous. So through the products, demand and supply of energy is of course important, but thinking of it and developing into a new business is important. But to go to that point, we need the support of the government to enable that. So as Dr. Hong mentioned, although it may not seem very economic at this point, it may not be part of an R&D project, but in the future it may be something like a preparation stage for to make it into a business in the future. So we need something from the government support in that mid phase. So it should not simply be talk about expanding renewable energy in the Korean market, but we need to look into the global market. So to look with a broader perspective. So not only R&D support, but for substantiation and commercializing aspects also need support. And our last panel, Mr. Song Yong-jun.
So my question is that you said you're committed to this industry for the last 10 years. Are you thinking of going overseas market? Wave power generation from the perspective of the existence of waves in the Republic of Korea, which is only a half or 1/10 of foreign countries. So it's not really favorable to wave power generation, our environment. So Korea is also largely dependent on the exports, of course, and the marine energy industry has a large market globally, and the plant research ships and plants research institute, since its establishment, has accumulated technological know-hows for over a few decades. And I think we can get some support from the state-funded research organizations like Ships and Plants Research Institute. So if we can secure that help, I think it's very promising for us to advance into overseas market. But in order for that to be possible, the role of the government is important. It's very important because our industry is not mature yet. And once we have the industry, then we can pursue organic growth. But until then, the government should play a leading role, which is now. So instead of missing opportunities and being sorry later. The government, I'd like to ask the government to act quickly. So I'd like to take two examples. The one is, as was mentioned by Dr. Hong, many projects have proven failure, and the oil price has hit $60 at some point. But the island situation is always very unfavorable because the energy is always expensive, even when the oil prices has hit the lowest. So I think that's where the government should put its policy efforts into these places with huge resource potential, but with higher electricity prices. And again, private sectors need to be engaged more actively. And I think that's why the government should send more positive signals to attract more private sectors, because so far the signals has been too weak. So if you look at the first wave farm, it was $120 per megawatt. That's the expected price. So when designing an incentive, the government should be able to secure or to guarantee that this much incentive will exceed the cost. And I think that will be from a institutional support and solid framework. Thank you very much for the answer. And this session was about renewable energy, a key solution in the current era. And we took a look at the potential of the marine energy sources and how the government can help the development of the private sectors with proper policies. And we all agree that Korea has huge potentials in terms of technology, but we still lack some vision and strategy from the side of the government. And I fully agree to the point, and it was a learning opportunity for me too. So thank you very much for your insights, and thank you for your participation.
Thank you very much. So with this, we will wrap up the second session. Thank you to Professor Hong Jong-ho, the moderator for this session, as well as all the presenters and panels. So this is the end of the first day of the IIOF, starting from the keynote speech to the maritime logistics and ocean energy. We had many meaningful and helpful presentations and discussions. Thank you very much to the viewers who have stayed with us till the very end throughout the day online. The forum continues tomorrow. I will meet you again at 10 in the morning at session 3. Thank you very much and see you tomorrow.